and organizers for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to join you, and I'm really impressed by what you guys are doing. It's really good to get a feel for what's going on in a part of the world that most marine mammalogists hadn't paid much attention to. So I'm obsessed with sperm whales and societies and culture, and I'm going to talk about these today. First, I'll say something about sperm whales. Many of you probably know quite a lot about them. Probably not so many of you have spent time with them. And then move into sperm whale clans, which the part of my research that I think has been most interesting, certainly for me, and it has set our thinking off in some new directions, which have captivated me and a few of my colleagues as well. Then I'll talk about a new idea that's recently been suggested, the idea of anonymous societies. And after thinking in those terms, it looks like to me anyway, that there are a lot of parallels between sperm whale clans and human societies. So they're similar in quite a few ways. Obviously, they're not similar in a bunch of other ways. So then I'm going to use this parallel first to think about how what we have learned through all the extraordinary work on human prehistory might help us as we start looking at sperm whale clans. And finally, a little bit the other way around, and suggest perhaps how what we know about sperm whales can have implications for how we think about human social evolution. Okay, well, marine mammals are extraordinary creatures, but of all of them, the sperm whale is in many ways the most extreme. It's the most phylogenetically divergent species of all around. It's the largest toothed animals, has the largest brain on Earth, the largest nose on Earth, which we now know is basically a sonar system, which makes the highest sound pressure of any sound of any animal. And they use this sonar system to effectively feed on the creatures of the deeper ocean. And doing this, the sperm whales around today eat almost as much as all human fisheries for all species, even though there's rather little overlap between what sperm whales eat and what we eat. There's a number of other fascinating features about this creature. They have the greatest sexual segregation of any animal, with the males principally being found in the Arctic and Antarctic, while the females are tropical and subtropical species. From now on, I'm not going to say hardly anything about the males, and I'll concentrate on the females. If there's time for questions at the end and anyone wants to know about the males, I'll give an idea of what we know, but in fact we know quite a lot less about the males than we do about the females. Sperm whales are highly social, and this has been a focus of my interest. I'm really interested in how they live their social lives, what they mean to each other. To do this, I've been studying them using ocean-going sailing boats. We actually started off doing this in 1982 in waters not too far from where you are off Sri Lanka, but have spent much of our time in the last 40 years working off the Galapagos Islands. So this is how we study the sperm whales. We have a 12-meter ocean-going sailing boat, and we follow groups of sperm whales by listening for their sounds and seeing them in the daylight, but mainly listening for their sounds for periods of up to 2 weeks at a time. So this is us off the Galapagos Islands with the sperm whales. And this picture was taken 30 years ago in 1995. But our research has maintained many of its attributes over this time. So, for instance, this is the same sailing boat we were using off the Galapagos 2 years ago. I don't know if these are the same whales that we were seeing 30 years ago, but they're the same islands. So things haven't changed too much, and we've tried to keep some of the methods fairly constant so that we can look at trends and make comparisons over these decades. But one thing we have added over the last few years, it took us a little while, but we've added the use of drones. And so now we can get images like this, which illustrate just how extraordinarily social these animals are. And I'll show a few more drone images as we go along. But throughout this work, a large impetus has been to describe the social structure of the sperm whales. The foundation is what we call the social unit. It's about 10 females and their offspring. These are mostly matrilineally related, so it's grandmother, mothers, aunts, and so on, and their young children. But some of the animals are not kin to each other, but they still operate as a very tight social unit. They move together over thousands of kilometers. They babysit for each other's young while the mothers dive deep for quite long periods to feed. They suckle each other's young. So unlike most cetaceans, where if you see a young animal suckling, it's the adult beside it is not necessarily its mother. They will defend themselves communally. We believe these social units are a major information exchange. They're learning from each other all the time and making communal decisions about things like where to move. And although much of the food they eat seems rather slow and sluggish and not very big, we're getting information now that they benefit from communal foraging. So the feeding success of the animals increases as the group size goes up. There's almost no sign of aggression, at least that we've seen, within or between these social units. So these animals seem to lead a pretty peaceful life, except when they're being attacked by predators, which traditionally were killer whales. They can get harassed by pilot whales, but of course, their main predator was us. Luckily, that's not happening much anymore. Now, as we sail through the oceans, we encounter the social units of sperm whales, but we often encounter them grouped with other social units. So there's a lot more than 10 animals around the boat. So here's an image. I've counted 60 sperm whales in this image. That's about 800 tons of sperm whale in this image. And as you can see, they go right to the edge of the image. And we think we were following about 100 sperm whales at this time. So the sperm whales form groups. The social units form groups with other social units. These groups last from hours to days. So the sociality happening at the level of the social unit, at the level of the group, and at one other level, which is what I'll get into next. And we stumbled across this social level by looking at, listening to the sperm whale sounds. So sperm whales communicate largely using what are called coders, which are patterned series of clicks. I'm going to play some now, and I hope you can hear them. This is two sperm whales communicating with each other. Now, what was happening there is two sperm whales were alternating coders, these patterns of clicks, and then at the end, they both made their coders simultaneously, right on top of one another. So this suggests that these exchanges have some of the attributes of duets, and that these coders are a lot about social bonding, about social relationships. Well, in 2001, my colleague Luke Rendell, who at that point was a PhD student in our lab, and I made what we think of was our big discovery. And it's kind of dominated most of my work and a lot of Luke's in the years since then. And this is how Luke presented what we found. In this diagram, the columns are the social units that we knew from the Galapagos, our studies of the Galapagos. So the left-hand one is social unit A. The next one, social unit F. The next one is a group of social unit A and part of social unit B, and so on. And then later on, we find social unit D and G and so on. So those are the columns, and the rows are the different kinds of coders that they make. So the top one is 3R. It's a very simple coder, click, click, click. And then as we move down, we get longer and more complex coders. The big discovery here was that the social units and groups of social units shown in green made very similar coder patterns. So each little circle here indicates that that social unit or group of social units made that particular coder pattern. And if it's filled with a color, that means that it's over 10% of their repertoire. So if we look at this diagram, on the left, the green social units and groups of social units made coda 5R, which is just 5 regularly spaced clicks, 6R, 6 regularly spaced clicks, 7R, and so on. So these social units made these very boring, equally spaced clicks, codas made of equally spaced clicks. So we very originally called them regular clan. In contrast, the next lot of social units, the blue ones, tended to have a space before, a pause before the last click. So they made 4 plus 1, click, 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 5 plus 1, and so on. So we called these the +1 clan. Again, not very original. There was one social unit from these early years of the Galapagos that didn't fit these patterns, the one shown in red, unit T here. It made codas which were neither the regular clan nor the +1 clan. We'll get into that later, but we looked at which social units formed groups with which other social units. So on the left here, we have the network diagram. The little squares or circles are individual whales whom we knew from photo identification. And the larger circles are the social units. The thin lines shows who spent a lot of time with whom. So at the top, there are 8 social units who spent quite a bit of time grouped with each other. At the bottom of the diagram are 5 other social units who also spent time with each other, but never with the ones at the top. So there's a clear social division between the top 8 and the bottom 5. And even though they're all found in the waters of the Galapagos Islands. If we look at the acoustic network, this time, these are the same social units. And here, because we only know a recording was made from a social unit, not from a particular group, the network diagram is for the social units. As you can see, the top 8 have very similar coda patterns, and the bottom 5 do. So the top 8 are the regular clan, and the bottom 5, the +1 clan. So a regular coda. The bottom 5 make these +1 codas. Listen for the pause before the last click. Well, we were wondering what was going on here. So we could collect sloughed skin from the whales and do some genetics. And while the 2 clans differ in mitochondrial DNA, there was absolutely no difference in nuclear DNA. So it looked like these clans were different, not because they were in different places, not because they had different coding genes, but because they had different cultures. The young sperm whales were learning different coda patterns from their mother. We looked at other differences between the clans. So this is what you might call a micro distribution from a sperm whale's point of view. So although they use generally the same waters off the Galapagos, the regular clan are closer to the coast, nearer the islands, and the +1 typically further from the islands. When we looked at movement, the difference is quite profound. So these are log scales, both on the distance, the y-axis, and time, the x-axis. What this shows that from time scales from about 6 hours to several years, members of the +1 clan were moving about twice as far as members of the regular clan. We also look at a feeding success. Now, we can't watch, or at that time, we could not watch the whales feeding at several hundred meters depth. Now with tags, it's become possible to do this, but we didn't do that. Instead, we looked for defecations. And on the basis of that what went out must have gone in, we calculated defecation rates. So the number of times that the whales fluked up, i.e. started a deep dive, and we saw a brown patch was our measure of feeding success. On the right here is 1989, which was a normal cool year, we might call it a La Nina year, off the Galapagos. And in that year, for the regular clan, in 1989, for the regular clan, about 20% of the dives were accompanied by a brown patch, whereas it was down at 5% for the +1 clan. So they seem to have very different feeding success. But the more remarkable thing was in 1987, an El Nino year, which is a bad time for pretty much anything in the ocean off the Galapagos, including sperm whales. The median feeding success of the regular clan groups on a day was 0. So most days we saw no brown patches at all. In contrast, the +1 clan, the one that didn't do so well in the normal years, was still doing less well, but it was doing quite a lot better than the regular clan in these difficult conditions. There are also differences in social behavior. So dive synchrony. So the regular clan are much more synchronous in their diving than the +1 clan. And this has implications perhaps for communal foraging, but also for babysitting. So if one has young babies, it doesn't make sense to dive all together. Instead, it makes sense to have asynchronous dives. So there's usually someone at the surface near the calves. And it looks like the +1 clan were much better at doing this than the regular clan. And this may be a cause or a consequence of the fact that the regular clan seem to have much lower reproductive success than the +1 clan. About half the groups had a calf for the regular clan, whereas they all did for the +1 clan. So we learned quite a lot about the clans of the Galapagos Islands, and obviously wondered if this was a specific feature of this area or it was general. Well, it looks like it's general. There have been studies. Here is our main study area off the Galapagos and mainland Ecuador. But more recently, there have been studies of Chile, in the Caribbean, of Brazil, Mauritius, and Japan. And in each of those areas, people have found 2 or more clans. And in the most detailed study to date, Taylor Hirsch, who was a PhD student in my lab, got together a consortium of people who've recorded sperm whales right across the Pacific Ocean. And so this is what she found. She found 7 clans right across the Pacific, from Japan to Chile, from New Zealand to British Columbia. So there's about 7 clans in the Pacific. We know there's about 150,000 female sperm whales in the Pacific. So that works out at about 20,000 females per clan. So these clans are very large structures indeed. They also vary quite a lot. So the +1 clan, the one I talked about a little bit earlier, was only found off the Galapagos and mainland Ecuador. Whereas the short clan, which was Unit T, the strange one in that early diagram, were found right across the Pacific from north to south and east to west. So the short clan has ranges of spans about 10,000 kilometers and probably has a lot more than 20,000 females. In contrast, this +1 clan spans about 1,000 kilometers and probably has a lot less than the average clan size, 20,000 kilometers. Well, we have also studied sperm whale clans in the Atlantic. And here our study area is much smaller. It's shown with my little blue box right on the side of the Pacific diagram, which I've expanded here. So here the scale is considerably smaller. It's about that scale bar is 100 kilometers if you can't read it. Whereas the one on the Pacific is 3,000 kilometers. And we expected, given our studies in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, that the sperm whales will be well mixed up over these quite short ranges. But that wasn't the case. So there are 2 main clans in the Eastern Caribbean, EC1 and EC2. For a long time, we thought there was just one because we did studies off the island of Dominica, and almost all the whales found there are of the EC1 clan. But eventually, about 10 years into our study, we noticed that there were a few different social units, 2 different social units, in fact, that turned up, and of the EC2 clan, but very rarely. But when we surveyed the whole chain, we found in the next door island, Martinique, it was nearly all EC2. And this distance is quite short. You can see Martinique from Dominica, but the sperm whales don't seem to move over there much. And if you're a EC2 sperm whale, you stay off Martinique or neighboring St. Lucia, but don't go over to Dominica. So the movements are also very much shorter for these Atlantic clans than the Pacific clans. So things seem to operate differently in the Atlantic, and in other ways too. So the Pacific clans that I described and that Taylor Hirsch has discovered have motifs, the regular clan, the +1 clan, and one I particularly like, the palindrome clan, some of whose codas sound the same forwards and backwards. So there's motif-based dialects for these clans. In contrast, in the Atlantic, the EC1, the EC2, the EC3, and the Mediterranean clans have single identity coders. So the EC1s do a lot of 1 + 1 + 3, click, 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 click. The EC2 have a regular 5 coder click, and the Mediterranean whales have a 3 + 1 + 1, click, 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 click. So the way they make their identity coders seem to differ between the two oceans. Well, going back to Taylor Hirsch's work, she looked at these specific clans she's discovered, and what she looked at was how often one clan made the identity coders, the ones that distinguish the clan, of the other clans. So they do occasionally make the coders of other, which are the identity coders of other clans. And what she found was that for these identity coders, but not for the coders in general, the more overlapping the clans were, the more they spent time in the same waters, the less likely they were to make each other's coders. And this is a really interesting pattern because it's one of the patterns that's used to demonstrate that humans have symbolic marking. So we mark our the membership of our ethnic groups, for instance, using things like songs and colors and of our clothes and diet and so on. And what happens with the humans, that is, some of these ethnic markers are distinctly different between humans whose ranges either overlap or abut one another, whereas humans who never really go near each other are much more likely to have similar symbolic markers. So this suggests that the identity coders are symbolic markers of clan identity, so that the whales themselves use these coders to say, oh, this is one of my clan, this is one of a different clan. So sperm whale clans have characteristic behavior, which we assume they learn from their mother, their social unit, maybe other social units in their clan. This characteristic behavior and this clan membership delineates social relationships. So we've never seen a grouping between clans yet. And it seems to be a fundamental element of sperm whale life. For a sperm whale, they are an individual, but they're also a member of a social unit, and they are also a member of a clan. And I think those last two collective memberships are probably very important for how a sperm whale perceives its identity. Well, we study sperm whale clans, obviously to study sperm whales, but it also turns out that they are a good model species for looking at how cultural evolution can work in non-human species. And that's because as we look at cultural behavior, so behavior learned from others, it really helps if that behavior is neither determined by genetics nor by the environment. And in the case of the sperm whale clans, we have evidence for both of these. The genetics are very similar, the nuclear genes that code for behavior between the clans, and they live in the same place. Well, now I'm going to move on to societies. What is a society? Society is a word that's used very loosely in common parlance, but also by scientists. Like I wrote a book which was entitled Analyzing Animal Societies, and I actually defined societies in the loosest way possible. But Mark Moffat has recently written a paper which gets us to think a bit more about what a society means. And this is his definition: groups whose constituent individuals recognize one another as members and that maintain control over access to a physical space. So as my colleague Sam Walmsley puts it, there's a perception of we-ness. So a society has a perception of, members of the society have a perception of, this is we, us, members of the society, and there's others who are not members of the society. And Moffat suggests this implies uh, that things like chimpanzees, baboons, meerkats, and humans and ants all possess societies. Well, Sam, my colleague, and I love the first part of this definition. We think it's really useful as we think about animal social systems, and particularly sperm whale social systems. But we really don't like the second part, what we might call the territoriality part. And we think this is counterproductive, and especially in the deep ocean, where there's little defense of space or resources, so no control over access to physical space. But it's also, we think, counterproductive as we look at animals on land. So if we can get rid of that second part of the definition, and Moffat doesn't seem entirely anti-doing this, it allows us to bring in a bunch of other creatures, such as gelada monkeys, African elephants, orcapods, and sperm whale clans. Well, one of the key elements of Moffat's definition of society is that the members recognize one another as members. And he points out that there are two ways this can be done. There can be individual recognition societies where every member comes to know all the others individually. So if you think of your family or maybe your lab group, you know all the others, and you know these are the members of my lab group or my family, and these people aren't. But there can also be anonymous societies. So individuals do not recognize each other individually, but they do know who is and who is not a member. So for this to happen, you need a marker of membership, which in the ants is chemical. So different ant societies have different chemical markers. In humans, these symbols are cultural. They are things like dialect and diet and clothes and flags. These are learned culturally from other members of the society. So we can tell these people are from our ethnic group or maybe our religion, and these people are not. We don't know about other vertebrates, but Moffat suggests that if they have anonymous societies, then the markers should also be cultural symbols, because probably chemical isn't going to work. They're rare, these anonymous societies, and they can, unlike individual recognition societies, be very large, and they have a lot of implications. An anonymous society has implications for the genetic and cultural structure of the population, how it's divided up, thus for population dynamics, as we see from the sperm whale clans, with very different reproductive success for the two clans, two societies. Different ecological effects in orcas, where the different communities and different ecotypes are eating very different things. And then for the psychology of the individual members who have to have a concept of weenus, what society means to them, and how they're going to use that concept. So, given this, I started thinking about parallels and contrasts between humans and sperm whale clans. And if we compare sperm whale clans with human ethno-linguistic groups, there's some very interesting parallels in large numbers, large spatial spreads. They form social barriers. So there are none that we know of in the case of sperm whale clans, and relatively restrictive in the case of human ethno-linguistic groups, social connections between the different societies. And these are anonymous societies with symbolic markers. So members may never meet, but if they did, they would recognize their shared identity. I think that sperm whale clans and human ethno-linguistic groups are more similar to each other than either is to a large-scale societal structure of any other species that I know of. Now, obviously, we don't need to get carried away. There are certainly contrasts. We recognize about 12 different distinctive behaviors that distinguish sperm whale clans. But there are countless for human ethno-linguistic groups. The timescales are also different. So human ethno-linguistic groups date back to at most 350,000 years, which is when we apparently got language. Sperm whales have been distinct for about 24 million years, and clans may have been around for a fair bit of that. In both species, there is cooperative care of the offspring, which is vitally important and a large part of what these societies are about, but it's done differently. In the sperm whale clans, it's done by bonded females within the social unit primarily. In human ethno-linguistic groups, this includes, at least sometimes, mature males. Although Richardson and Newsom suggest that this is relatively recent, and that if we go back a little bit, humans, societies existed a few thousand years ago. Most of the cooperative care was being done by bonded females, and that the mature males becoming part of this cooperative care is quite recent. So I recognize that comparisons with humans can be fraught, and we have to be careful about anthropomorphism, assigning human characteristics to non-humans. And then this is particularly frowned upon in the West, in the societies that I grew up in, perhaps not so much in your part of the world. But Frans de Waal brings up this lovely word, anthropodenial, for the opposite trait, denying human properties to other animals just because humans have them. Well, I started considering this parallel during our studies of the Galapagos. So here's another lovely drone picture from Anna Eguiguren, who's the graduate student who drives the drone in our lab. But it's not always like that. Just before we had this lovely study and Anna got this picture, we had a 2-week trip out in our boat looking for sperm whales, and there weren't any. So I was had a lot of spare time, and I read this wonderful book, The Dawn of Everything. It's a great big thick book. It's a new history of humanity, and it suggests that a lot of the things and ways of thinking about human evolution that were common were in fact wrong, or at least not universal. And it's beautifully written, it's full of wonderful examples, and it gets one thinking about all kinds of things. And so as I read it and wished we had whales, which we were going to find, but not for another few weeks, I started thinking about how the lessons that these guys were getting from human history might relate to how we studied sperm whale clans. So I came up with a few lessons. The first one is about resources and societies. And we biologists, as well as anthropologists and archaeologists, see resource acquisition as a major driver of social evolution. So a particularly big example of that in the human case is the idea that agriculture drove the increased complexity of human societies. And things were quite simple until we got agriculture, and then things got complicated. We got cities and laws and theaters and so on. And they show this is wrong as a universal process. There are non-agricultural societies that were very complicated, and agricultural societies which were very simple. So I think we need to be careful about such things as we compare clans. And clans may or may not differ much ecologically. They could be eating much the same thing, but be differing in a lot of other ways, or vice versa. Other is that human societies are incredibly variable, even within short spatial ranges. There's enormous variability in the nature and structure of human cultural groups, and we should expect the same with clans. And I've hinted at some of this, so that, for instance, that with human groups, we've learned human evolution, we've learned a lot from the parallel, or in some cases, contrasting evolution of societies in Africa and Eurasia over the past thousands of years, and with those of the largely separated North and South America. And so there are very interesting similarities and very interesting contrasts between these two land masses and how humans arrange things. Similarly, I've suggested that, well, we're getting indications that things may be different from the sperm whales in the Atlantic and Pacific, which are largely separate from the point of view of female sperm whales. And we're just beginning to bring Indian Ocean sperm whales into that contrast. And it will be really interesting as these parallels progress. And I think we can also think of things happening on other scales. So, for instance, we have learned a lot about human evolution from what happened in Australia, a quite large landmass that was separated from the point of view of humans from the rest of humanity for a long time, and evolved in particular and very interesting ways. Similarly, the Mediterranean is sperm whales are largely separate from those in the Atlantic. They are genetically different. There's very little evidence of animals making it through, and they behave in different ways. So we're learning quite a bit about sperm whales from the strange case of the Mediterranean animals. Vocalizations and behavior. We call them ethno-linguistic groups, but they don't always line up too well. So in humans, you can have cases where the language is the same, but other behavior is very different. So an example of that might be the Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. They both speak English, but a lot of other things are very different. There's a very strong concept of we-ness for the two different groups there. And so in the clans, may have similar dialects, but distinct physical behavior, or the other way around. Another thing that Graeber and Wenrow bring up in their book is that we've perhaps, well, we have got things wrong in our concentration on particular genders. So in human societies, it was generally supposed that males were driving things, and this may have been because most of the anthropologists and archaeologists doing the work were males. But they showed that male and female behavior could drive societal organization, or they could be the males or females could lead societies, and males or females could be the sources of innovation for new kinds of behavior. So in sperm whales, it's kind of the other way around. I and many of my colleagues have assumed the societies and cultures of sperm whales are driven by female behavior, but maybe we have underestimated the males, and they actually provide a little bit more than sperm. And now there's a few scientists who are beginning to pay a bit of attention to the males, who we've rather ignored up till now, at least from the perspective of their social organization. The final thing that really captivated me from the dawn of everything is the idea of schismogenesis, which is a lovely word I'd never met before. And it's the idea that humans, individually or as groups, define themselves against one another. And so interacting groups deliberately adopt strongly contrasting behavior. So they produce the example of neighboring groups who one group holds slaves and the other definitely does not hold slaves. Or one is autocratic, the other is democratic, the political system. Or to take a current example that's very close to me is Canadians deliberately do things to show that they are different from Americans. And that's especially true over the past months. So I'm wondering whether strong differences in the behavior of the clans may be driven by schismogenesis. So for instance, the extreme differences in movements between the regular and the +1 clans off the Galapagos, they hardly overlap in how they move around. This is how far they travel in 12 hours. Maybe partly driven by the +1 clans, having this feeling that we do not wiggle around like the regular clan. We go where we're going in nice straight lines. So these are some ideas I've been thinking about how humans can help, thinking about findings about humans can help us think about sperm whales. But when I first shared these ideas with my colleague Luke Rendell, he says, well, yeah, that's really interesting, but only sperm whale scientists will be interested. That's you and me and a few others. What about thinking about it more broadly? So I have tried to do this, and thinking about what this parallel might tell us about humans. Well, both humans and sperm whales clearly are socially complex. And there have been all kinds of potential explanations for this social complexity. For humans, going from bipedalism to control of fire, monogamy, and so on. Sperm whales are deep diving, the oceanic habitat, and so on. But if we are thinking about potential necessary drivers for the development of large-scale, culturally distinctive societies of the two species, then it's useful to look at traits which line up, and they're found in both species. And the four that line up particularly well are mobility, cooperation, brain size and complexity, and the capacity for culture. So, in conclusion, sperm whale clans have many members and cover large areas. They have distinctive cultural behavior, they delineate social relationships, and I think they're most comparable to human ethno-linguistic groups as large-scale anonymous societies. And so we can use this parallel both to guide our study of sperm whale clans, but also to think about what traits might be drivers of large-scale social structures, which might include large-scale movements, cooperation, especially in raising the young, large and complex brains, and the ability to use culture in complex ways. So finally, I'd just like to thank all the people who've helped me with this work and these ideas, the crew at sea, the graduate students who've done most of the analysis, and the people who have commented on these most recent ideas. So thank you very much. Okay, so I stop sharing.
Awesome.
Maybe I'll stop sharing now, shall I? If I can.
That depends. It's nice to see the sperm whales. So you can
okay, well, I'll leave the sperm whales there. Okay.
Very, very cool talk. Thank you so much. I had a question about the anonymous societies, but it got answered in your last slide, so I'm good for now. But let's open it up for the audience. Does anybody have questions? If you want, you can unmute and just ask. We have some questions in the chat, but I see Tanuja, do you want to just ask? We can see it. Or if you're not on, maybe Udayanga can take one.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
I can.
Oh, nice. It's very nice talk. Like, I love this. So I have one question actually. Like, I'm from Sri Lanka and studying cetaceans, mainly delphinates and berenwhale organization. So I'm really interested in sperm whales, but get to see one of them. And I would love to. So my question is, have you seen any male and female sperm whale clans close to each other, and they are sharing quotas between? Because I think they have different mating like rituals and kind of things, and they are not meeting their own clans or something.
Yes. Well, we don't know as much as, well, we know a lot less about the males. So in summary, what happens is the male leaves his the group that he is, the social unit he was born in, at maybe 10, 12 years old, some a bit younger, some a bit older, and gradually moves, and we don't know whether he leaves because he gets the he's had enough of his mother and his sisters and he just wants to get out of there, or they've had enough of him and they chuck him out, or a bit of both. And then he moves gradually to somewhat cooler waters and forms what we call bachelor groups with other males of about his age. So these would be, teenage males hanging out together at latitudes about where I am now, about 45 degrees north or south. And then as he grows, he gets a little less social. He moves to higher latitudes, maybe 50, 60, 70 degrees north or south, and gets very big. And then in some very neat work done by some Norwegian scientists, showed that these big males that they study off the north of Norway, so at very high latitudes, will take off and spend about 3 or 4 months heading down into tropical waters. And it takes quite a long time to get down there, quite a long time to get back again. And they're interacting with the breeding females. And we've watched what happens. And so the males come in and accompany a group of females for a period of hours, usually. And presumably that's when mating happens. The males are very much larger, so they're about 3 times the mass of the females at this point. Interestingly, for a species so sexually dimorphic, there doesn't seem to be much competition between the males. There clearly is some because they have scars from each other's jaws, but we rarely see them fighting with each other. In contrast, it seems to be female choice, and the females like some males and just so thrilled when they come and nuzzle up against him and so on. And then another male comes and they all just dive, and he's sort of left thinking, I came all the way here from Greenland. And anyway, okay, so sorry, that was a bit of a sidetrack. To your question, we don't know if the males maintain knowledge or feelings of identity with the clan that they were born in. They rarely make codas, and nobody yet has studied those rare codas to see how they relate to the codas of the clans, and in particular the codas of the clans where they are trying to breed. So this is a really interesting question. The only thing, we don't know if the males try and mate amongst the females in the area they were born in, amongst females in some other area, amongst females from their own clan or a different clan, or whether the females like males who are from their own clan or a different clan. Although the genetics, which suggests that the differences in nuclear genes are actually more similar than you would expect between clans, would perhaps indicate that the males quite often, maybe generally, mate across clans, so that the nuclear genes are moving between clans. So there's a lot we don't know, and this is a really interesting question, which there are a few graduate students around the world who are starting to work on this at the moment. So we'll know a bit more soon. Sorry, that was rather a long answer.
No, thanks so much. Like, it's a perfect answer, and I think Sri Lanka would be one of the nice places to start working on eastern side of Sri Lanka. So thank you so much.
It is actually, and that's where I started studying sperm whales on the actually on the west first, and then on the east, and it was great. I really enjoyed the years I spent there. And then there are now Sri Lankan scientists who are picking up the work, and that's great.
Oh, nice. Thank you so much.
All right. We have another question by Shweta. If you want to, you can just unmute. Might be nice.
Hello, am I audible?
Hello. Hello.
It was such a great presentation. I'm Shweta, I'm from India and pursuing my master's in political science. So my question is, how do your findings challenge traditional view of intelligence and culture as uniquely human traits, anthropocentrism? And what ethical concerns arise from recognizing such complexity in sperm whales?
Thank you. Those are a great and very challenging questions. And you know, you are the academic who studies humans, and I have to be careful in telling people like you how they should view things. But I think we should, there's been this long history of humans thinking we are special because of we have tools, we have communal care, we have culture, we have and so on. And after almost every one of those comes up, and someone says it's the key difference that distinguishes humans from every other species. It turns out that another species does it, and so humans are an extraordinary species. We have to recognize that. I mean, what we're doing now, me talking to you from all over India and other countries, from the other side of the world, is just an extraordinary thing, and we've done that. So, but I think it, as you mentioned, it raises ethical questions about how we treat these other species, and I think it's particularly the case amongst the cultures that I live in and grew up in, where the perspective of not only human exceptionalism, but human dominance is very strong. I think certainly from my short experience in Sri Lanka, there was less of it there. And so it's easier. But here there is a very utilitarian view that animals are in the world for us to use. And I hope perhaps the kinds of things that we're finding and other scientists are finding move us away from that and move us to the idea that we share this planet with all these other creatures, not only the ones with big brains and cultures, but all of them. And we should think about how we're behaving in that light.
Right. Priyank had a question.
Yeah, hello. I'm Priyank. I'm a marine biologist. My question is that why, after a certain period of time, male and female sperm whales get segregated and travel in a different groups, and what's the reason behind it? And is there any benefit for these species because of these segregations?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I talked briefly about the approximate thing, whether the males leave because they want to leave or they leave because the females chuck them out. But the evolutionary reason for this is very intriguing. And the traditional view was that the males are much bigger because of sexual selection, and so being much bigger, they need to eat much more, and the kinds of food that they eat come in much bigger packages at high latitude. So squid are bigger. The big males eat quite a lot of benthic fish, deep water sharks and things like that, which are big. So that is the traditional view. But I am not so that there's probably something to that, but I'm not so sure, because if there was if there was good food in these high latitudes for females, I suspect they would be there. Although we don't find them in these cooler waters, probably there's no physiological reason why they can't go there. Okay, so for instance, there have been recent findings of females using relatively cool waters near the Aleutian Islands in the Northern Pacific. So it doesn't look like they can't do that. So my perspective, and I might be wrong, is that females are typically optimally adapted for getting resources from the environment to produce excess energy, which they can put into reproduction, into their young. That's in mammals in particular. And so one would expect the female sperm whale is given the sperm whale body plan of the optimal size and shape to do this, to get as much of the nutrition from the deeper waters, the ocean, that it can. And the males, because of sexual selection, have moved beyond this and are, in that sense, being outcompeted by the females, who are much more efficient, who would be more efficient foragers. So I think the evolutionary reason for this may be, at least partially, that the males are trying to get out of the way of the females, that if they hung around all year with the females, they would be outcompeted by the females. So they try and find places where the females aren't, and for the reasons best known to the females, they like to stay in warmer waters. But in some cases, we have found warm waters without any females, and then we tend to find big or fairly big males hanging out there. So there have been years off the Galapagos where there were no females there, but there were some males in these waters right on the equator. So that's another possibility, but it's a really interesting question, and yeah, we don't know the answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I have another question from Ameya.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the talk. It was wonderful, very enlightening.
Thank you. Thank you.
My question is about the clan distribution map that you'd shown earlier in your presentation. In that map, the Galapagos Islands seem to be something of a hub of sperm whale clans. Is that because that is where the most thorough research has taken place, or is that due to some other maybe ecological reason? And if so, is there any cultural impact to that, sort of sperm whale cultural impact to that?
That's a really good question. And I think the answer is primarily the first of the alternatives you suggested. There has been a lot more research of the Galapagos, mainly by our group, but also occasionally, and by some others, and we've collaborated and got their information. And there has not been anything like the same intensity anywhere else. We did a fairly intense study for about 8-10 months of northern Chile and met quite a few clans there. So I suspect the Galapagos is a good area for sperm whales, and it is in a sort of oceanographic hotspot because it's on the equator, and it's where different currents meet. So there may be a bit to that, but I think as people do more intense studies and large-scale studies in different places, they will find similar diversity there.
Thank you very much.
We had one more question. Pradeep?
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for this presentation. I'm a marine mammal researcher here in India. So actually, my question is, I read a philosophical book that in that particular book, they mention who are expressing themselves in most consciously or the minimum words, they are maybe the more clever. In your research, that like they're connecting with our human mentality or the sociality. So you're finding like like anywhere you observe something like the sperm will communicate with you with very minimum like vocalizations are more intelligent than who are using like who are making more noise actually.
That's a really interesting question. I never thought about that before, but it had pondered it because in some ways the species that is perhaps most comparable in some ways culturally to the sperm whale is the killer whale. And the killer whale's vocalizations, or the orca's vocalizations, are incredibly complicated. They make two or more sounds at the same time. Some of them are pulse, clicks, whistles, and they put them together in an incredibly complex fashion. And it's kind of the antithesis of the sperm whale. And if we look at human music, there is some music, some ancient music, some modern music, which is extremely simple, but really moves us, means a lot to us. And there is also some extremely complex music which does the same. So I agree that in certainly in scientific writing and to some extent in more popular writing, brevity, conciseness, clearness is fantastic. But I think in some ways a better parallel for what the sperm whales are doing is music. And because I think the major function of the coders, as well as the vocalizations, the killer whales, and so on, is to do with social bonds, to do with relationships between animals. And at least from our example, it seems that both simple and complex sets of vocalizations can work very well. But thank you for that great question.
Thank you.
Just maybe we can take one more if anyone has.
Hello, this is
anything to
Tanuja
ask.
here. Am I audible, Isha?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Isha, for putting us across to Hal Whitehead. And Hal Whitehead, sir, thank you so much for that eye-opening presentation. I was not aware. I just got to know from your presentation that there are sperm whales in the Indian Ocean as well. Okay. And it was a very complex and thought-provoking presentation. I had a few questions about the young male calf as to at what age does the young male calf move away from the group, and when he's at what age does the male calf reach puberty, or what age he starts, selecting a female. And when it comes to selecting a female, does he come back to the same group, or he goes in search of females to other groups? So that was my question.
Okay, well, just going through the chronology, his mother and the social unit he was born into at about age 10 to 12, although there's quite a lot of variation. It probably goes from about 7 all the way up to 15 years old. Although what's been found is that in the years before he actually leaves, he becomes more socially distant from his social unit. So the calves are usually pretty central to the social unit, the very young ones. But as the young males get towards leaving, they become less part of the unit. They're wandering off here and there or staying a little bit away from everyone else. Secondly, when does he become sexually mature? I think sexual maturity, again, it varies a lot, but it's probably in the late teens, sort of 16 to 18, that age group. At that age, he is usually in an area where there are no females. And it's thought that males don't take an active role in breeding until their late 20s. So perhaps about 28 or so. And at that age, it's thought, but hasn't been fully proven, that they start making these migrations down to the tropical, subtropical waters to meet the females. The last part of your question was about selection. And here, largely, we don't know. We don't know how the male selects the group of females he's going to spend a little time with, how the females decide whether they want this male or not. We don't know whether he is targeting females from his natal clan or females from a different clan, or vice versa, whether females like males who are from their clan or from a different clan. But we do know that at least some of the mating takes place between clans. So thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hal. Thank you, Isha.
We have one last question, maybe a quick one. Ashwin?
Hello.
Hello, Ashwin.
Hi. Just one question here. Do these individuals change their clans in any stage of their lifetime?
Well, the females rarely, if ever, do. We don't know of any instances where a female has changed her clan, and because the clans are quite distinctive in mitochondrial DNA, that suggests almost all females stay within the clan that they were born into. And as for the males, we don't know. We don't know whether when they leave their mothers, they kind of give up on clans and that's the end of it. I'm not a member of a clan. I don't care about clans anymore. Or whether they maintain some identity feelings of the clan they were born into, or maybe even of a different clan. So there's a lot to learn about the males.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hal. Dipani, do you want to?
I'm just astounded.
I know.
I'm just astounded. We don't tend to reach much sperm whale literature, Hal, I'm sorry to say, amongst everything that we do, and this was just outstanding. I mean, just the fact that it's like the entire ocean, these whales are moving around and they're so structured and they know every corner of the ocean. Very unlike the baleen whales, of course, because they've all formed their own little pockets and they don't move But there's movement and there's communication and there's mating and everything happening, and the ocean is just one big piece of land, almost like for them. Unimaginable stuff. Very good. Do you think any of this segregation has been impacted by whaling that happened earlier? Do you think whaling had an effect on sociality or on sexual segregation? Is what I wanted to ask.
I think so. I think it's very likely because the whaling was very intense in some places, and some of the effects of whaling in where it was most intense were they focused on the large males. Well, no, focused. They had a preference for the large males because they were bigger, more product. So in some areas, including the waters near the Galapagos, because there was very intense whaling off Peru and Chile, as well as illegal and pirate whaling going on there. There were virtually no large males left at the end of that whaling, and also we believe we found that in that area, quite a lot of the social units have unrelated females as members of the same social unit, whereas in the Caribbean, where whaling is intense, whaling was quite a lot more distant, 150 years earlier rather than 10 years earlier. Most of the social units are pure matrilines. In other words, all the females are closely related. So the thought is, and this has been seen, that when the social units get very small, they may merge with other social units. And so it seems possible that the lack of matrilineal structure of the social units in the Pacific could be due to the fact that the whalers, destroyed them. And so they were, many of them were small and merged with other ones. The reproductive success was very low initially in the years following whaling too. And part of that may be down to the lack of mature males, but it also may be down to the social network that the females depend on to raise their offspring had been very badly affected as well. Yeah. And if I've got a moment, I'll just say one other thing which intrigues me, and that is the possibility that the clans were differentially affected by whaling. And for instance, we found by looking at the logbooks of the whalers that they typically learned very quickly defense mechanisms against the whalers. When the whalers appeared, these were whales who had not been met whalers before. This is in about the 1830s in the North Pacific. Whalers suddenly appeared, and the success rate of the whalers suddenly went down over about a period of 3 or 4 years. It went down by 40%. So they were doing very much better initially than they were doing a little later. So the whales were learning from, it seems, from each other how to avoid these guys. I suspect that different clans may have responded differently. Some learned really fast. Some had inbuilt mechanisms which helped them avoid the whalers. So for instance, a clan moving in straight lines may have been better adapted at avoiding the whalers than one which tended to wiggle around and go this way and that.
Yeah, very, very interesting stuff. And I just hope that this inspires the younger generation to be able to look more at culture and behavior of all mammals or all animals. Yeah, this is a question again, I think, over here. Sorry, is that okay with you, Hal?
Yeah, one more. Yeah, that'll be fine. Yeah.
Isha, you want to read it out, or Rajas, do you want to say that?
Yeah, I think you just unmute.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Hello,
It was
Rajas.
nice to hear your amazing presentation procured through actual research. So I have basically two questions. It would be nice if you could answer them. So the first question is, if the males have no recognition of glands, you said earlier that when it's reaching upon specific sexual maturity, they are either kicked out or they leave the group. So how do they learn to recognize other codas of other clans if they have never encountered it before in their life?
Well, I think that the basic idea of the anonymous societies is you know who we are, but you may or may not recognize the other clans, or in our case, ethno-linguistic groups, as a particular identity. So the members of the clan know that this whale is or is not a member of the clan, but they may not know which of the other clans it's a member of if it isn't one of theirs. So potentially that may be happening for the males. Yeah, and again, we don't know. There's much we don't know. And I think you had a second part to your question too.
Yes. So my second question is, has an instance of misinterpretation of codas observed between members of different clans while attempting to communicate with one another?
No, unfortunately, we haven't, and we're a long way from getting to. I mean, all that may happen. We really don't know how the interactions between the different clans happen. So, for instance, if you have two groups in the same area of different clans, they could just avoid each other. So as soon as they hear the others, they move off away. They could be aggressive to one another. We think that doesn't happen. We've never seen an instance of that, but it could. Or they could just ignore one another. So they could keep doing what they're doing and just not cooperate with the other clan. So they could even, swim through the area where the other clan is, but just not pay any attention to them. And we don't know. And I'd love to learn those things. And when one of the ways people have learned a huge amount about communication in other species is by doing playbacks, right? So the obvious thing, someone who studies birds or monkey would think, oh, well, play the sound of the other clan and see what happens. Well, people have been trying that. I've been involved in a few efforts, and we have got nothing useful out of all these attempts, as far as I know, or almost nothing. And I believe the reason for that is that we're not fooling the sperm whales. They hear the sounds that we're making and say, here I'm very much anthropomorphizing, say, oh, there's those foolish humans trying to be like us. and that elicits all kinds of responses, but not the appropriate one that we were hoping for. As technology develops, people may be better able to do this, but I think also the development of technology in these very, very informative suction cup tags people are putting on the whales, as well as drone footage, is giving us so much better view of what is happening in real time. So the value of such experiments is going down because we can actually see what's going on. And then now with, for instance, the better drone pictures, the better ability to analyze acoustic recordings, I believe we may get some information that can help answer your question just from really good observation and analysis of the data we collect in real time.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for answering the questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hal, after listening to you, it feels like orcas and sperm whales are just complete opposites, even though they are just so similar in size and strength. When it comes to aggression, for sure, I mean, the way we've seen orcas behaving with other marine mammals. Sperm whales don't ever attack any other smaller mammals, do they? Marine mammals?
Well, not usually. Anyway,
No,
there are
yeah.
reports of whalers finding males with very, very occasionally with seals inside them, and very, very occasionally of finding them with humans inside them. But those could be accidents or whatever. However, we have to be very careful about generalizing. So yeah, if you know, a couple of years ago, if you'd asked me, I would have totally agreed with what you said. But we now have drone footage of orcas trying to attack the sperm whales, and the sperm whales, instead of just huddling sort of and beating off the killer whales with their tails, they went after them. The sperm whales were chasing the orcas away. Now, this was a bit exceptional because it was that very large group I showed the image of, and there were maybe 100 whales there, and there were only 6 orcas. So they were heavily outnumbered, and some of the sperm whales were not having any of this, and they went after the orcas and chased them away. So that can happen. Also, I was just at a conference of the European Cetacean Society, and there was some Icelandic scientists who were describing how routinely the pilot whales chase the orcas away. And apparently it happens fairly frequently. Orcas are going along doing their business, and suddenly a bunch of pilot whales come and chase them away. So yeah, we have to be careful about it.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Maybe they're evolving also for their own benefit.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. Isha, are you
You're
there?
welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the talk. My God.
Yeah,
it was just lovely.
Very, very interesting. And it's such a different perspective on things.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for arranging it and for having such a lovely audience with such great ideas and questions. No, I enjoyed it a lot. Okay. Well, good luck to all of you.
Thank you so much. You have a good
Thanks
day
so
there.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Chal, bye, Isha.
Okay, see you. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.